Human remains.
In Star Trek Picard Episode 6, The Bounty, all the skeletons in the closet are coming out. And by skeletons in the closet, we literally mean there are two very famous dead bodies from Star Trek canon are revealed to be stored at the same station, basically in the same room.
Oh my.
This episode has so many awesome member berries and Easter eggs that the plot literally consists of the Titan crew splitting up to essentially go to two different locations, Daystrom Institute and the Fleet Museum, each stuffed with different kinds of Easter eggs. So welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Arey, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Star Trek Picard Season 3, Episode 6, The Bounty. The episode begins with the Titan running away from Starfleet ships controlled by changelings, all while dropping decoy transponders. 3 different Starfleet ships converge around one of these transponders. These ships are the USS Trumbull, which is a Duderstadt-class starship, like the Intrepid from last week, but not the same ship. It's probably named for Doug Trumbull, a VFX pioneer who worked on Star Trek the Motion Picture and, of course, Blade Runner.
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe.
The other ships are the USS Yorktown, which is an Echelon-class ship, and an Excelsior II-class ship, and the USS Mestral, named after the Vulcan explorer from the Enterprise episode Carbon Creek. Mestral was the greatest Vulcan of all time, mostly because he was a huge fan of I Love Lucy.
I Love Lucy is on tonight.
Over on the Titan, Jack has more bad news as we learn that he has Irumodic syndrome. Picard wonders if Jack got this from him, saying,
"Inherited from me."
Now this is the same neurological disorder that Jean-Luc was diagnosed with in All Good Things, the series finale of The Next Generation.
Many people continue to live normal lives for a long time after the onset of Irumodic syndrome.
Jack asks his dad.
How did you survive it?
Jean-Luc reveals that he didn't survive it, and Irumodic syndrome is eventually what killed him in Picard Season 1's finale. Of course, at the time, Jean-Luc was reborn into a synthetic body, which is why Jack says,
Right, the positronics.
So wait, Jack's seeing that red collar and going all Born Identity because he's got Irumodic, or what's it called?
Well, maybe, but in All Good Things, not everybody believed that Jean-Luc was really shifting through time, but instead they thought he was hallucinating because of Irumodic syndrome.
Oh, okay, so in Next Gen, Beverly and Will thought Irumodic syndrome was the reason Picard was going all loopy. And now they think Irumodic syndrome is why Jack is so stressed out? Is Irumodic syndrome just like when people say they have bad allergies even though they've just been doing drugs?
Nobody does drugs in Star Trek.
You sure about that?
I'm assuming you're not referring to cannabis.
Sadly, no.
I'm not sure about that anymore, no. So, as Worf and Raffi beam onto the Titan, we hear an original series era transporter sound effect. Raffi is also wearing a Starfleet uniform for the first time this season. Picard greets Worf saying,
It's been far too long.
and Worf replies that it's been
11 years, 5 months, 4 days.
which means Worf has not seen Picard in person since about 2390 or 2391, which would have been after Worf was the captain of the Enterprise E in the 2380s.
Wait. Worf was captain of the Enterprise? How come I don't remember that?
Because you don't read the books.
It's not my fault. I'm a little dog.
Okay, so in the novel The Last Best Hope, Picard left the Enterprise and Worf became the captain. This was confirmed by the official Star Trek Instagram logs, which state that Worf became the Enterprise E captain around 2381, but wasn't still captain by 2386. Either way, Worf hasn't seen Jean-Luc after he stopped being captain of the Enterprise, all of which happened off-screen. But the number of years Worf hasn't talked to Picard is also an Easter egg. 11 years, 5 months, and 4 days is very similar to the exact amount of time that Spock served with Captain Pike, which, as he stated in the menagerie, was
11 years, 4 months, 5 days.
The running joke that everybody secretly hates Picard's wine continues when Worf refers to the wine as
The annual bottle of sour mead.
and then even says,
It is quite tart, sir.
Oh, that must mean that like Klingon blood wine is really sweet, like Kool-Aid.
well, Worf did love his prune juice.
It's an earth drink. Prune juice.
Warrior's drink.
But blood wine in Star Trek was actually created by this character from the show Enterprise. This is your mom. Worf briefs the gang on the background of the Dominion War, specifically that time that Starfleet used a bespoke virus on all the changelings. This references several episodes of Deep Space Nine, including When It Rains, Extreme Measures, and Broken Link. Now, at this point in the episode, the Titan gang splits up and heads to 2 different places, the off-site Daystrom Institute and the Fleet Museum on 8th and Prime. The action is intercut between these 2 spots, but each location has more Easter eggs than most entire episodes of other Star Trek shows. So, let's talk about Daystrom Station first. When Raffi, Worf, and Riker first beam onto the station, we actually hear Data's voice before we see him because he's one of the voices of the computer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Worf says that this station contains
Many of Section 31's most nefarious table scraps, it would seem.
Riker and Worf have a brief moment where Worf explains the super-secret clandestine organization,
Critical division of Starfleet intelligence.
but Riker confirms that he knows who they are. This lampshades the idea that in Deep Space Nine, nobody knew about Section 31 until Bashir kind of blew their cover. Apparently, by 2401-ish, people like Riker know too. Riker and Worf walk by several huge Easter eggs at this point, including something called Genesis Device 2, which references the terraforming tech from The Wrath of Khan. We even hear a cue from James Horner's score when the Genesis device is glimpsed. Right after that, we see a screen telling us that the remains of Captain James T. Kirk are stored here. Back in Generations, Kirk time traveled via the Nexus from 2293 to 2371, where he died after helping Kirk whoop Dr. Soren.
Oh my.
Picard buried Kirk on Veridian 3 under a bunch of rocks, but apparently Section 31 dug him up and put his body here. And yes, we have confirmed with Terry Metalis that these are Kirk's remains and not just his skeleton. Kirk's date of death on the screen is in the 2370s, which checks out with the Nexus action and Generations. Riker and Worf also encounter a genetically modified Tribble, which Riker calls
Attack Tribble.
Riker teasing Worf about the Tribbles recalls the DS9 episode Trials and Tribulations, in which Odo teased Worf about the Great Tribble Hunt.
Tell me, do they still sing songs of the Great Tribble Hunt?
As the Daystrom AI scans Riker, we see Will's service record complete with a photo from the Nemesis era of Trek. This record also lists Riker's birthplace as Alaska and references his dad, Kyle Riker, who we first met in the TNG episode The Icarus Factor. Data's dreams attack the landing party in the form of a holographic crow, which Data dreamed about in the TNG episode Birthright Part 1. We're then confronted with Professor Moriarty, played by Daniel Davis, who first played the holographic version of the Sherlock Holmes villain in the TNG episode Elementary Dear Data. Moriarty saying,
I think, therefore I am.
Is a quote from Rene Descartes, but also references Moriarty saying this exact thing in the second and his final TNG episode Ship in a Bottle.
I think, therefore I am.
Riker notes that this is not the same self-aware Moriarty that we encountered on the Enterprise, which means that the original holographic Moriarty is probably still stuck in that holographic simulation that Geordi and Data cooked up in Ship in a Bottle. Moriarty is plagued by a song that he can't quite get out of his head, which Riker realizes is Pop Goes the Weasel, a tune that Data was trying to whistle when he and Riker first met in Encounter at Farpoint. The episode actually flashes back to that exact scene in which Riker whistles and Data says,
Marvelous, marvelous.
This tender moment actually should unbreak your heart because in Nemesis, after Data died, Riker was so grief-stricken that he couldn't even remember the song that Data was trying to whistle.
No matter what he did, he couldn't get the tune right. I can't remember the song.
Throughout the episode, we learned that this new version of Data is a composite of Data, Lore, B4, and Alton Soong, Data's human brother who was first introduced in Picard Season 1. Now, at different points in the episode, both Raffi and Picard mention that Data has already died twice, which references his physical death in Nemesis and the death of his living consciousness at the end of Picard Season 1.
And our little life is rounded with a sleep.
Now, toward the end of the episode, Geordi makes the distinction that everybody previously knew.
Data the android. But this is Data something else.
Crusher notes that this humanoid synthetic Data is similar to the synth body that Picard inhabits, saying,
He's like you, Jean-Luc.
and Geordi says this Data is
Synthetic, but human.
quietly and quickly. This line from Geordi cements Data's lifelong dream.
But I would gladly give it up to be human.
This is why Riker nicknamed Data Pinocchio, and on some level, Data's desire to become a real boy has finally happened, making the story of Data in Star Trek possibly the longest-running Pinocchio story of all time. But again, this is still a composite of different personalities, which is why Data says,
There are many of myself inside Daystrom Android M510.
and by the way, having a Daystrom AI with the prefix M5 references the first appearance of Dr. Richard Daystrom and his M5 computer from the original series episode, The Ultimate Computer. And speaking of TOS and the classic films, it's time to warp back to the other massive Easter egg basket in this episode, the Fleet Museum at Athan Prime. As we mentioned in our first Picard Season 3 video, the name Athan Prime references the character of Ethan Cole from Terry Metalis' 12 Monkeys, played expertly by the legendary James Callis. When the Titan arrives at the Fleet Museum, we learn that this place houses
Every legend resurgent This is their final resting place.
Which kind of makes this place like a giant Star Trek toy box, but like for real. If you squint, you'll see the original Stargazer, a Romulan bird of prey, and in a very deep cut, we later see the refit version of the NX-01 Enterprise, which was never seen on screen, but it was imagined by Doug Drexler for Enterprise Season 5, which of course never happened. If you squint, it also appears there's at least one Katinga-class Klingon battlecruiser, and an original series-style Constitution-class ship here called the New Jersey, which was originally captained by your mom.
Wow, 2 of them in one video?
Yep, you thought you were safe, but you weren't. Shaw mentions that this is the old space dock, which seems to imply that this is literally the same space dock which first appeared in The Search for Spock. Later, when Geordi and Picard chat, Jack and Seven scroll through the greatest hits from the Fleet Museum, starting with the Defiant from Deep Space Nine, and we hear the Dennis McCarthy theme from that series.
That one is the Defiant.
And then the big one, the USS Enterprise A, which is the second classic Enterprise from the original movies, first introduced in The Voyage Home. And it's the only one of the TOS era ships that can truly be called Kirk's Enterprise, since he was the only captain of it. We last saw the Enterprise A on screen in the Undiscovered Country, where it was thrashed pretty badly. But it looks like Geordi has fixed it up pretty nice for the museum.
This is nice!
We also hear the Alexander Courage composed classic Star Trek theme when we see this Enterprise.
But this one is my personal favorite. Kirk's Enterprise.
And the nostalgia just keeps coming when we see Voyager and we hear the Jerry Goldsmith theme from that show.
Oh, she's a beauty.
Seven points out that
She made her name farther out than any of those other relics had ever gone.
Which is true. The fact Voyager was stranded in the Delta Quadrant for most of its time in service proves that by default, technically, it has boldly gone the furthest of any Star Trek ship ever. This brings us to the central Easter egg of this episode, and one that isn't just there to look pretty, the HMS Bounty. The name of the episode is called The Bounty, which could have referenced the idea that the Titan crew was being hunted, but really foreshadows how important this old stolen Klingon ship is to this story. In Star Trek IV The Voyage Home, Bones renamed this stolen ship the HMS Bounty after the crew ripped it off from Doc Brown in The Search for Spock. Bones called the ship the Bounty in reference to the novel Mutiny on the Bounty, which was, in part, based on real events from 1789. In Star Trek history, this is the ship that Kirk and crew took back in time to figure out what Jack calls here
The whole whale thing.
As Seven talks about the ship going missing in San Francisco Bay, we hear Leonard Rosenman's score from The Voyage Home.
The HMS Bounty, pulled from the bottom of San Francisco Bay.
Now at this point, Jack realizes the ship has a cloaking device, which sets into motion his plan with Sidney LaForge to steal the cloaking device and install it on the Titan. Now the idea that Jack steals the Bounty's 23rd century cloaking device and puts it on the Titan has actually been foreshadowed by the closing credits since the first episode of Picard Season 3, in which we've seen a diagram of the cloaking device complete with Klingon writing and the classic cloaking sound effect. The idea of a Federation ship using a stolen cloaking device started with the original series episode, The Enterprise Incident, but also featured in the TNG episode, The Pegasus. In this episode, Geordi points out that having this cloak violates several treaties, which probably means the Treaty of Algernon, which was also referenced in The Pegasus. In this treaty, the Federation agreed to never develop cloaking tech.
In the Treaty of Algernon, the Federation specifically agreed not to develop cloaking technology.
But interestingly, in the anti-time future from All Good Things, in which Riker was a cranky old admiral, a souped-up version of the Enterprise had cloaking tech. Beverly was divorced from Picard, and Geordi had daughters named Sydney and Alondra.
What about the little ones? Brett, Alandra, and,
Sydney.
So with the return of LeVar Burton as Commodore Geordi LaForge, we meet his other daughter, Alondra, played by Burton's real-life daughter, Mika Burton. Now the younger LaForge we've seen on the Titan so far this season, Sydney LaForge, is played by Ashley Sharp Chestnut. With the arrival of Geordi and the new version of Data, Picard Season 3 has officially brought the gang back together because, even after Riker is captured, he is reunited with Deanna Troi, who is being held prisoner on Vadic's ship. This marks the first in-person appearance of Marina Sirtis in this season so far. No flashback, no hologram, just Troy in the present day. We've yet to see the entire TNG crew together in one room, but we appear to be getting very, very close.
Dude, we're getting the band back together!
But the episode ends with an even bigger mystery, because not only did Daystrom Station have Kirk's body, they have Picard's dead human body from Season 1. When Beverly says human remains, and then Data repeats that Jean-Luc Picard was the thing stolen by the changelings from Daystrom Station, the biggest mystery of Picard Season 3 is now, what do the changelings want with Picard's dead body?
What does God need with a starship?
Are they making a Picard doppelganger, a zombie Picard? Or maybe there's something in Picard's DNA that he passed on to Jack, something maybe from his Borg assimilation that makes the changelings able to adapt to their new, undetectable forms. Let me know your thoughts and theories down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Arey.